Welcome to this Techies talks that we are having in association with Publicis Sapient. We are today discussing a space that is becoming very exciting for the tech industry and indeed for India in general. Global Capability Centers or GCCs. These are the tech and operations arms of MNCs in India. As we have been recently writing, GCCs revenues have become a significant part of India's GDP and an even more significant part of India's services exports. I find that a lot of international magazines are now picking up on the theme and showcasing what India is going through in the GCC area. GCCs have evolved massively over the past 20 years. They are no longer back office operations. They are increasingly becoming vital contributors to their parent organizations' strategic goals. This transformation necessitates a shift towards delivering value aligned with broader business objectives. And today we are going to discuss how GCCs can move up that value chain and become indispensable partners to their parent organizations. How do you move to that position? What strategic maneuvers are necessary to achieve that position? Why don't you start, Neeraj?
The first thing is, the center to be like any other center that you would have in the home location. The way I want to send is the mindset. We need to start thinking from a mindset that, especially in our context, we have a center which is in Gurgaon, Melbourne, and Sydney. I think that mindset has to be all over the organization. And I think that's a starting point to say, this is, what we need in terms of how we should be thinking to get the real value is out there, right? And, the ambitions we talked about, I think the ambition is big. It's no more about, as we said, cost arbitrage or being an execution center. It is about delivering the value and innovation to our customers because, at the heart of every organization, is the customer. And that's what matters to us. So I think the bold steps that probably we need to do is to build that mindset across the organization. We are one organization. And when you bring the talent, it is location agnostic. Where you get the best talent, you bring in and they will deliver the value. That is there. I think, what we need to do also is very important that everybody is thinking about the customer. Each and every colleague that we have should know what is that they do impacts the end customer. Because, only when you're thinking from that perspective, you can bring the real value and innovation. Because innovation has multiple dimensions. Sometimes we just focus on, how we can be more productive, how we can deliver things faster and all those things. That's a good part of, innovation. But another part of innovation is what is that we deliver that values to our end customer. And that will only happen when everybody start thinking. So I think what we need to do is the mindset change, the customer centricity in the organization. And, those are two very important things in my mind.
And your parent company is very clear. This is where it needs to be done. India is where it needs to be done.
Absolutely. I think they're very clear in their mind, this is the place where it can happen. If not here, probably it's not going to happen anywhere else.
I would say, the two things that stand out for me is, how we align culturally, which removes some of the friction that you often see between the headquarters and GCCs. And how do I understand my strategy, right? That again aligns to customer centricity, transformation, and other things. So when we set up our teams, right, we understand what we are going to deliver, right? So right from day one, some of our induction processes, whether it is within LTC or within, each of the platforms as we call it, right? We start from that. What is the CEO's vision and his or her core objective, and then how it trickles down to each of the platforms delivering that, right? We call it the golden thread, right? Right from, your CEO's objective to a developer's objective. How are they linked?
I think I'll echo some of the sentiment here, but largely the key is that for us, how well connected we are. Like, are we sharing the same goal, mission, vision statement as our parent organization, right? So, if Lowe's wants to grow at a certain clip, that's what we will contribute to. Right, and it really helps because then you're not having an India-specific strategy, really, right? And that also reflects very structurally in Lowe's, right? So, for example, we have a concept of one leader in a box. So, if a leader sits out of India, they'll have teams across India and US, and that's where it ends, right? So. It's also very structurally reflecting. Right? So decisions taken whether in the US or India are applicable to the entire organization.
I think there's to me, the prerequisites are there's an orientation, and there are a couple of examples I can think of design. Orientation is, and this is something you've seen at Sapient, right? Because we've been in the country now for 24 years. I've been there pretty much all the 24 years that we've been here. But I think the orientation is really about why or why not. I think it's Sapient, the choice we've always made is why not, right? Because if you ever think about, should we be distributed? Should we drive strategic work from India? Should we make a strategic bet in India? These are questions that if you ask as a why, there are very articulate answers. And you can ask as a why not, and there are very articulate answers. So now the question is your orientation on what choice are you making? If you're always betting on the why not, I think you're always trying to move faster, because then you'll solve every problem. Like, if someone said, I'm going to start a new operation anywhere, you will have teething troubles. The biggest issue with teams, when you build teams, is that do teams really feel like peers? And teams feel like peers when they're all empowered in the same manner. If I have an organizational policy that says in India you can only do X, whereas in New York someone else is empowered to do something different, you will not feel like a peer group. You'll be like, I feel I can't make this choice where someone else can. So I think that's very important, even from a design standpoint. How are you empowering everybody to make the same kind of choices, have the same expectation? But see, this is where sometimes, and this is where I go back to some of the cultural element. We fall into the trap of saying, oh, but I live in India, so I don't know the customer. If I'm working for a Formula One as a brand, there's been no Formula One race in India for the last 12 years. I don't understand this brand. That's a cop-out then. Because you'll be like, look here, I'm going to lead this. I'm going to be here. So, when I talk about communications, I always tell people that I have the highest respect for someone who can write the first draft. Anybody with reasonable intelligence can review a draft. The toughest thing is writing the first draft. So similarly, having the first perspective on something should be an expectation you should have irrespective of geography. And so you should have an expectation from someone from India being able to come up with a completely new idea, even if it's half-baked, and having others contribute to build on it instead of always waiting for someone to set a frame and then, filling that frame. So those to me are the design aspects and the orientation, which I feel are, will help definitely accelerate the potential that, I feel the space has.
I'm sure you work with a lot of GCCs and the newer ones that are coming in. What is the level of ambition that you see? Have things changed a lot?
I think it's changed. I think if you went 10, 15 years back, a lot of the ambition was, give me operational efficiency and give me predictability of size you can get to. I think now the ambition is a lot more complex. Now it's at least a few of them that we work with. They're like, I want to set up a 300-person data intelligence unit that is going to be strategic. Whereas, 10 years back, their ambition might have been different. So you're looking for both, they're looking for perspective on, okay, the point you made, how do you make it culturally seamless? Is not a conversation 10, 15 years back most people are having. But today, the fact that it needs to be culturally seamless is seen as a prerequisite to get it right. Otherwise, you'll only attract a kind of talent that will come in and say, I see a 3-year stint, then I need to move out because this place, I will not go beyond a certain level. So that only comes with being culturally seamless. So we see a lot more aspect about how do I unlock value in a more strategic level rather than just at a more tactical or a more near-term level is definitely one thing that we see. So the human element has definitely, I think, become a lot more to the fore than just a structural element of I need an India footprint because it gives me some percentage points back into the bottom line.
Now, apart from the people you make your products for, the companies you make your products for, how do you treat your headquarters? Do you treat them as well as customers because you work as per their plan despite having your own India agenda? And also when it comes to actually getting on ground and getting things done for your customers, what are the sort of bold actions that you really need to take at your GCC to get things done?
Your customer is anyone who is defined as a customer for the company, right? So there may be internal customers, external customers, but not really from a center to center standpoint, right? So what we think of as a customer is our end customer, the associates who are working for us in the company, how do we make internal applications, technology, or anything else? If we are talking to, as a technology person, if I'm talking to finance, then they are my customers. So I think that's the definition that we will go with. And it's a very regular definition, whether you are a GCC or not a GCC, right? So I think
you don't look at your parent company's retail customers. No, your customers very clearly the employees and your divisions within the company.
No, I'm saying that our customers are what are customers for the company, right? So which is end customers, you if you are playing an internal role, then there's an internal customer to the company, right? But there is no definition that US is a customer for India, right? So that's not a definition, and I think that helps in getting the right customer centricity as well, right? So if you start thinking about it in a manner where, hey, some group is asking for something from an India team, whether it is on the benefit for the end customer or not, kind of muddles the equation overall, right? So you have to really think of what is Lowe's first, what is your end customer needing, what are the internal customers needing, and I think that's the leading principle. That's the first principle that we talk about. I think from our previous discussion, 2 points, right? So there's obviously data, and I think locationally, when you're not sitting very close to your customers, data really helps. But having said that, I think what we also focus, and I think you had raised that point, how do we develop that customer empathy? How do we some of the good talent that we have, which has seen some models that have evolved in India, for example, or Southeast Asia, when those people actually travel, they actually see how customers are interacting with our properties, how they are shopping. They are able to come up with groundbreaking things for us.
In your case, I've heard that you also, for instance, decide sitting here what products should be kept in which store and which shelf, and that kind of to that level of detail, I guess.
Today we are doing a lot of that decision making out of India. We are doing like 80% of our planograms in India. So there is a lot of decision making that happens because leaders here, teams here are very, very cued into what our customer needs, and different geographies as well within the US. So that's the level of customer empathy that we try to bring in. There are some other things that we do, right? Like, for example, how do we have created a small store within the Lowe's office, right? And it's an actual working store. Right? So we do all that so that people are very, very sensitized.
This is something we've been hearing from a lot of GCCs, that they place all of these different functions together in the same building as much as possible so that they learn from each other and all of that.
Before I answer that, I'm very passionate about this customer thing. For me, there's only one customer in an organization. That is the end customer we serve. And I call everybody else as a stakeholder, right? So you are my stakeholder, you're my stakeholder, and that can be across. It's no more that, we have stakeholders in the parent organization. Parent organization have stakeholders in GCCs, and we all work with each other to serve the end customer. And some of the other things, to my point, yes, I think all these things helps. Like you talk about, Lowe's, setting up a shop here. My view there is, if you look at the real world right now, most of our good part of our interactions are digital. And in the digital interaction, even if you are in the parent location, let's say you are in US, Australia, you are as close to the customer as I am in India. There's no more difference, right? So how do you get that customer centricity? It's not about your location, how close you are, proximity to the end customer, but it's about, are you end-to-end everyday thinking, what is the impact that I make for customer? So for me, I think the most important thing is that every person that you have in the organization, when you ask them what is that they do, can they say, this is what I do for the end customer to make them successful? And the moment we have that thought process, I think those physical, proximity is no more a case. You actually make an organization much more customer-centric.
Is that data enough? Or what about the emotions of customers and all that? That is something that you don't see.
No, I agree. Emotions you don't see, but what I'm trying to say is, even the person in, let's say, a US or America or Australia will not see, because ultimately the interaction is through digital. And, that digital interaction is boundaryless, right? In fact, what's happening is, a lot of contact centers are now in India. So you get to see a lot more emotions, how the customer is going through the pain of using product, and your teams are sitting to the point you're saying you have end-to-end stack here. So you have the customer center there, and your teams are there, the operations teams are there, and you would probably know more the emotions in India than probably other places.
It's a very industry specific spin as well, right? Like, there are some industries which are very physical in nature. There are some industries which are very digital in nature, right? So I think that's also a spin.
I think, again, this is where, as an organization, right, whether it is your headquarters or GCC, we need to understand the customer segmentation, right? A customer segmentation is very, very important to how you would serve your customer, right? A lot of, again, there are lot of customers in the vulnerable segment, in the old age segment, that would still prefer a different touch point. You would still need to go and look at how do you address some of their concerns, right? So I would say, that's where data comes in to look at, how your customer segmentation is. You could use a lot of, AI, ML based emotional sentimental analysis. That's again something very common right now in terms of addressing incoming customer, how that customer could be feeling. So a lot of use cases, but I would say it's all bespoke, right? That's where hyper personalization, and that's where again GCCs can play a very, very important role, right? How do you hyper personalize, whether it is servicing your customer or providing a better product to the customer?
Are you using AI, Gen AI, starting to use all that to try and understand all this?
Look, I think Gen AI is the new is a new word, right? But your typical ML engines, NLP has existed for a long time now.
Yeah, I think when it comes to customer centricity, the clarity you always need to seek is, and as a services company, it's an interesting two-dimensional question, because who you're solving for is finally your customer, right? I could be building a time card application internally. My customer then is my internal people who are going to be the users. So who's really looking for value realization from what you're building? And second is, as a services company, you're also figuring out who am I solving with. To Neeraj's point on stakeholders, right? Because we're working with the client, but the client is only going to be successful if the end customer is going to be successful, or who are the end customer for that particular, the asset that you're building, right? So you need that clarity, because it doesn't matter if you align with your stakeholder, and I'll borrow Neeraj's term, because if the customer is not going to be happy, the stakeholder at some point is going to be pissed with you because great journey, but we got to the wrong destination is of really very little value. So I think that's kind of important. So to me, at least, that's how I look at the customer centricity standpoint. What it also does is it just helps you realize that I go back to the expectation thing, that I'm expecting you to always solve for saying what is finally going to value realization and this going to mean? What is it going to look like? One of my favorite quotes is the eye can see what the mind is willing to comprehend, right? And if you can't comprehend that there is an expectation from you to understand something, you will never see an opportunity to make it better. So if you limit yourself to what you think your role is, you'll only see opportunities in that space. If you see your role, if you comprehend your role as I can paint the picture, I can put the dots on the canvas, then you will look for opportunities to put the dots on the canvas. Otherwise, you'll always be looking to join the dots. So that to me is the orientation.
I just want to stay with you, Sanjay, on this whole thing of driving transformation of these GCCs and all that. Is that becoming very imperative now?
See, I think it's an imperative because that's the opportunity. See, at the end of the day, as commercial enterprises, our role is to unlock value where it exists. If you look at just the way all the stars are aligning, I think if there is an opportunity, every organization, bar none, is making a transformative journey. Slower, faster, doesn't matter, but everybody's making, the direction of travel is the same for everyone. I think India as a location to accelerate that journey, to enrich that journey, is an absolute given. How much you do it is going to be about ambition, operationalization, finally, right, and resilience. And I think I said this even before. Funnily enough, I think I said this last year, same time at the same conference, that it's like we're sitting on a gold mine, but the choice is: do you want to dig with a spoon, or do you want to dig with the biggest earth-moving machine that you can find? That choice is ours. So I think the opportunity exists. So I don't think anybody can turn around and say, "Oh, I was just dealt a bad hand, and therefore we didn't do it." The question is, everybody was dealt a decent hand. Now, how did you play the game comes down to, how you think about the game.
So I think, first of all, transformation is now a constant, right? I think we are at a space where, you get comfortable with, okay, I have done technology transformation or digital transformation, and then, you are hit by AI and Gen AI and, everything else, and you have to rethink. And it's not rethinking, it's really, there are more possibilities that open up, and you have to constantly evolve, right? And I think that realization is very, very deep-rooted right now with almost every industry, almost every company. And how Indian centers actually are playing up to that transformation with all the good talent, with all the good capabilities. I think that's a structural question that each company is answering. And the smoother it is, the better it is, the more established it is. I think we are getting better and better results out of it. To be agile.
Neeraj, transformation, is that becoming absolutely imperative for you, for the GCC itself?
Yeah, I think because my thought is, transformation is must for an organization to survive. As Manasvi said, that's the only constant. And if that's the key for organization, we are part of the organization. You can't. I mean, that's the most important part. You got to drive the most important thing. So yes.
Okay. And your parent company, I mean, you are, I mean, for the parent company itself, it's important that you now take on all of these transformation projects, is it?
So I will go back to that. I think what we are building is from a mindset where we're saying we have multiple centers, just like we have a center in Sydney, we have a center in Gurgaon. So, the whole of they versus us has to disappear, as we discussed earlier. And I think the moment that disappears, it ties up everything. The best, I mean, in my view, the best combination is if I can make the whole team sit in this room, there cannot be a better combination. But that's not the luxury we have in the world. So now what you want to do is not to split also in 10 locations, but what we say is, okay, if this needs to be done based on capability, based on experience and everything, how do we get a more optimized way of setting up the teams so that the individual teams have full ownership and accountability? Because speed is another part, right? It's a very fine balance between, if you split the work across multiple teams, there's too much of handovers and everything, it makes things complicated. But you need to have distributed teams. So it's all about case-to-case basis, coming up with the right split, but in a way that is the unit, which might be, in technology, what we call squads, they are independent, they can run faster. So it's a very fine balance that you do. So thought process is, how do you leverage all that you have in the best combination versus, is it in India, is it in Melbourne, or is it in Sydney?
So when we talk about transformation, are we looking at incremental progress? Are we looking at radical changes and big things going to happen? What is it, if each one of you could call out, what sort of change are we talking about?
Given the competitive landscape that we have, right, the changing technologies, my belief is we're no longer looking at incremental benefits, right? It's how I leapfrog.
Ashish, when you say a leapfrog, what is an example of a leapfrog?
Waiting for the perfect condition to deliver, right? I think we don't have the luxury for that, waiting for everything to fall in place, right? How do I get bold? How do I make sure that, I grab what's the biggest problem out there, right? And not wait for things to mature, right? Is what is my approach, right? So take the biggest thing, solve it for the headquarters, right? So that would require you to leapfrog.
Okay. Gen AI comes, you jump into it and try and find
with the right checks and balances in place. As said, I mean, banking industry is a industry, heavily regulated industry. So you have to, have the fine balance there.
Which big idea can you think of lately?
Several, right? I think, you have probably known about our self-checkout machines, which have gone in, right? It has changed how we think about experiences on the self-checkout terminals. Today, 60% of our actual store traffic is going through self-checkout machines, and we are able to pinpoint the experience to a single machine, change the experience to a single machine. So that's a big one for us. 60% of our store traffic goes through self-checkout. So that's a big one. It's a strategy change overall.
Yeah, I think I've got to agree with Manasvi and the others. It's both, right? I think you have to seek the leapfrogging opportunities, but don't lose out on the incremental. It's a bit like, T20, right? Most topical these days. You got to look for the boundary hits, but the singles are crucial as well. So you can't, the main thing is don't have a dot ball. So don't have a dead moment, right? You got to be moving all the time, but look for the big opportunities, because I think that's where it is. I mean, and I think that's again an orientation, right? You're always seeking the incremental, but you're looking for the, you're looking for the moments that can create outsized benefits. So like for us, when we look at, we're investing heavily in productivity platforms. We're investing heavily in looking at, ideas that can be productized.
So, it's becoming a fascinating moment for India. I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger story by the day. Every single week we hear about some new GCC coming into India and with very, very big plans. And as all of you said, you have to transform fast if you really want to create value for your parent organization. So thank you all for a great discussion. I'm sure we'll have many more in the coming days because I think that this is really becoming a big movement for India. Thank you all.